For 40 years, a secret was buried in the Utah desert. 40 years of silence. 40 years of documents locked away, denied by the government, and forgotten by almost everyone. But what happened in those hidden facilities in the 1960s didn't stay buried. And when it finally came out, it exposed one of the most shocking biological weapons testing programs ever run on American soil. This is the story of Project 112 and what the military did in the name of national security. It's 1962. The Cold War is at its peak. The Cuban Missile Crisis is still fresh. The Soviet Union is seen as an existential threat, and the United States government is convinced that chemical and biological warfare is coming. Not maybe, coming. Any day now, American cities could be attacked with pathogens and nerve agents, and when it happens, the military needs to be ready. So they decide to test, not in theory, not in labs, in real conditions, with real agents, and with people. In May of that year, far from Washington's eyes, a small military command is established at Fort Douglas in Salt Lake City. It's called the Deseret Test Center. The public hears nothing about it. Local officials know nothing. Even most military personnel know nothing. This center will coordinate what becomes one of the largest classified weapons testing programs in American history. Between 1962 and 1973, the Deseret Test Center plans 134 biological and chemical weapons tests. Only 46 are ever actually carried out. Some are canceled, some are delayed, some disappear from the record entirely. But the ones that do happen, they change lives forever. The command structure is unusual. Deseret doesn't report through normal Pentagon channels. Instead, it reports directly to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. It's funded jointly by the Army, Navy, Air Force, and the CIA. The mission is stated simply, quote, prepare and conduct extracontinental tests to assess chemical and biological weapons and defense systems. In other words, figure out how to use biological weapons anywhere on Earth without getting caught. The cover story is even simpler. To outsiders, Deseret is just another administrative office, a bunch of paperwork pushers sitting in a building at an old Army base. No one suspects that inside those walls, dozens of men are planning to release pathogens across the ocean, spray bacteria into the Arctic, and contaminate tropical jungles with agent simulants designed to mimic plague. The actual testing doesn't happen at Fort Douglas. That would be too risky. Instead, it happens 80 miles away at Dugway Proving Ground. Dugway is a massive facility buried in the Utah desert, surrounded by nothing but scrubland and rock. It's about the size of the state of Rhode Island, and it's been used to test weapons since World War II. The men who run Dugway understand what's about to happen. In the early 1960s, they begin preparing. New labs are built, containment chambers are constructed, dispersal equipment is installed. The facility becomes a de facto factory for biological and chemical warfare research. By 1962, everything is ready, and the tests begin. The first major test series is called Project SHAD. SHAD stands for Shipboard Hazard and Defense. The idea is simple, almost clinical in its detachment. The Navy wants to know what happens if a ship is attacked with a biological or chemical agent. What is the ship's vulnerability? How quickly would the agent spread? How many sailors would be affected? And most importantly, how do you decontaminate the ship afterward? So they decide to use actual ships and actual agents, or at least simulants of those agents. The military justifies this by saying the simulants are harmless. One of the primary ones is Bacillus globigi, which they abbreviate as BG. It's supposed to be a safe stand-in for anthrax. Another is Serratia marchescens. It's supposed to be harmless to healthy adults. The Navy takes several vessels, the USS Granville S. Hall, the USS George Eastman, and others. They're retrofitted with special dispersal equipment. The testing begins in international waters, and on the high seas far away from any civilian population, the Navy starts spraying. Sailors are ordered onto the deck during the tests. Some are told they're participating in a decontamination drill. Others are simply told to stand by. They're given minimal protective equipment. Some have masks, some don't, some have suits. Most have just their uniforms. And as they stand there, clouds of bacteria are released around them. The particles settle on their skin, their clothes, their hair. They breathe it in. The military records everything: wind speed, humidity, temperature, how far the particles disperse, how quickly they settle, whether they reach certain distances. It's methodical, scientific, clinical. It's also, by modern standards, shocking, because these men were never told the full truth about what they were being exposed to. They certainly weren't asked if they wanted to participate. And it's not just ships. Project 112 expands. It goes global. The Deseret Test Center coordinates tests across multiple continents. In Alaska, they release nerve agents, the real thing, not simulants, to see how they behave in Arctic conditions. In Hawaii, they spray biological agents over populated areas. The official story is that it's a routine military exercise. No one local knows. No civilian authorities are informed. In Okinawa, which was still under U.S. administration in the 1960s, Project 112 conducts tests on Marine Corps units. Soldiers report being exposed to mysterious aerosols. Some claim they were sprayed from aircraft. Others say they were walked through contaminated areas. Years later, when declassified documents surface, some of these claims are confirmed. But the government never admits to it openly. Liberia, Egypt, South Korea, the tests spread across the world. The stated purpose is always the same: to understand vulnerability and defense, but the actual practice raises a simple, horrifying question: what are they really learning? And at what cost? By the mid-1960s, over 5,000 American service members have been involved in Project 112 tests. Many have no idea they participated. Their medical records don't mention it. Their discharge paperwork doesn't mention it. If they get sick later, if they develop respiratory problems or cancer or neurological symptoms, there's no official record to connect their illness to Deseret and Dugway. That's by design. In the spring of 1965, something happens that nearly exposes the entire program. A group of sheep start dying in a remote valley south of Dugway. Thousands of them. About 6,400 animals dead all at once. It's not natural. The pattern is too specific. The location is too close to the facility. Ranchers know something is wrong. They've lived there for generations. An investigation begins, not a classified one. A real investigation, because ranchers are demanding answers, and the evidence is impossible to ignore. The military eventually admits that nerve gas drifted from Dugway during a test. It was supposed to be contained, but the wind shifted. The gas escaped, and it killed thousands of animals grazing in what they thought was safe land. For the first time, the public gets a glimpse of what's really happening in the Utah desert. Newspapers run the story, ranchers sue, the government pays compensation, but it's treated as an accident, an unfortunate incident, not as evidence of a massive ongoing weapons testing program. Throughout the late 1960s, tests continue. A chemical called zinc cadmium sulfide is dispersed over American cities. The stated reason is to simulate how particles spread. But the chemical is toxic. In small amounts, it's supposedly safe. But over decades of exposure, especially for people with weak immune systems or existing health conditions, the effects can be severe. The military releases reports saying the chemical is harmless. They rely on military epidemiologists to study the effects. But these same epidemiologists are being paid by the Department of Defense. They have an interest in the program continuing. There's no independent oversight, no unbiased review. Biological agents are tested too. Tularemia, brucella, Q, fever. These are serious pathogens. They cause real disease. The military argues that the amounts released are small and that the locations are remote enough that civilians won't be affected. But here's the problem with that logic. The effects of exposure to biological agents can take months or years to appear. A person exposed in 1963 might not develop symptoms until 1965 or 1967. By then, how do you trace the exposure back to a secret military test they never knew happened? By 1969, President Nixon decides to end the offensive biological weapons program. He signs an executive order banning the development of new biological weapons. But the work doesn't stop entirely, not at Desiree. Tests continue through the early 1970s. The official closing date is 1973, but some researchers argue that elements of Project 112 continued under different names in different programs for decades. The Department of Defense denies this, but their denials have been wrong before, because Project 112 itself wasn't acknowledged by the government until 2002. For nearly 40 years, the program was officially non-existent. Veterans who participated had no proof, no documentation, no way to prove to the Veterans Administration that their illnesses were service-connected. In 2002, the Pentagon finally releases declassified documents, fact sheets on the tests, details on the agents used, locations, dates, methods. It's voluminous. Over 140 separate tests are documented. But even with the declassification, critical information is still redacted. Names of commanders are blacked out. Exact test procedures are removed. The full scope of Project 112 remains partially hidden. What we know is damning enough. American service members were exposed to biological and chemical agents without informed consent. Many became ill. Some died. The government spent decades denying the program existed. When they finally admitted it, they claimed the exposures were small and the effects minimal, but medical studies tell a different story. Veterans from Project 112 and Project Shadi have elevated rates of circulatory disease. Some have cancers that epidemiologists say shouldn't be that common in their population. Respiratory illnesses are widespread. Many veterans are now eligible for VA health care and disability benefits because of their participation. But getting those benefits requires proving you were there, and most veterans have no official documentation. The ethical questions linger. The scientific justification for the test was always thin. The United States had defensive capabilities against biological weapons. Exposing your own soldiers to unknown agents in uncontrolled conditions wasn't a reliable way to test decontamination procedures or vulnerability assessments. It was political. It was about appearing ready for the Cold War. It was about showing strength and capability. The soldiers were expendable tools. No one was ever prosecuted for Project 112. No commander was court-martialed. The scientists who designed the test continued their careers. Some retired with honor. Some went on to positions of authority. The government paid settlements to some veterans. Other cases were dismissed. The full accounting never happened. The lesson is this: in times of existential fear, governments will do things in secret that they would never admit in public. And the people who pay the price are often the ones least able to fight back: soldiers following orders, sailors standing on decks, civilians in contaminated cities. None of them knew what was happening. None of them had a choice. Today, Dugway Proving Ground still exists. It's still a major military facility. But the biological weapons program officially ended decades ago. The United States is bound by the Biological Weapons Convention. So is every other major nation. But secrets persist. Paranoia lingers. And in the back of government buildings and classified facilities we don't know about, testing probably continues, because that's what happens when you normalize the idea that soldiers are experimental subjects, that citizens are acceptable risks, that national security is worth any cost. Project 112 was exposed only because a government fell, because a wall came down, because enough time passed that the politicians who authorized it were dead or retired. But there are programs happening right now that operate under the same logic, the same compartmentalization, the same assumption that the public doesn't need to know. And by the time those programs are exposed, by the time the documents are declassified and the truth comes out, decades will have passed. Careers will be ended. Lives will be lived under false pretenses. The story of Project 112 is a Cold War story, but it's also a timeless story. It's about power, secrecy, and the cost of security in a fearful world. It's about what governments will do when they think no one is watching. And it's a reminder that history doesn't end just because the Cold War did. The legacy of Project 112 lives on in the medical records of veterans, in the fear of scientists who speak out, in the archives of declassified documents that raise more questions than they answer. If you found this story unsettling, you're not alone. What happened under the banner of national security was a betrayal of trust, a violation of the most basic ethical principles. And it happened not in some distant authoritarian state, but in the United States of America during peacetime in the 1960s. Subscribe if you want to know more about the hidden history of the Cold War, the experiments the government didn't want you to know about, the weapons they still won't fully acknowledge. This channel reveals the stories that get buried, the truths that get hidden, and the cost of living in a world where security comes before transparency. New videos every week. Thanks for watching.